is to discuss the Lowell Memorial Auditorium Management Contract. If the clerk would call the roll, please.
Chairman Mendonça.
Here.
Councilor Elliott.
Here.
Councilor Martin.
Here.
3 present.
All right. At this point, unless members of the committee have initial questions, I was going to turn it over to the manager. Councilor Elliott.
Yeah, I don't have any initial questions, but considering we have members of the Board of Trustees here, and we haven't heard from them, and I'm not sure you're going to stay for the next meeting, I'd like to see if the members have any comments, any questions, any issues they'd like to raise prior to going to this.
All right. I would like to thank the members of the Board of Trustees for attending. They were invited. I appreciate you being here. So at this time, if any of you want to take a turn at the microphone, if you have any questions or comments regarding the contract, you may do so. Does anyone want to?
I wrote you.
I did receive it this morning. I believe my colleagues did as well. So I appreciate you sending that. All right. So I guess we'll move on to the city manager, if you'll give us the highlights.
Sure.
Where we stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to thank the trustees for being here tonight, and I want to thank the trustees for the work that they've done over the course of the last few months in terms of working with us to negotiate the new contract. As you know, they voted unanimously 4-0 on a motion by Mr. Topier to approve this contract moving forward, giving it their support with a couple of conditions that are having to do with the budget for the auditorium, and they receiving a copy of the contract once it's fully executed. So that will be taking place. Our goal in going out, obviously our simple goal was finding someone to operate the auditorium moving forward. The Mill City Management, which had been the operator of the auditorium for the last almost 2 decades, had chosen to step aside. Their contract was expiring in June, so it would have been going out to bid anyway, but they chose not to submit a bid and notified me early on that that would be their intention. We then began the procurement process. We received quite a bit of attention and interest, but when all was said and done, as everyone knows, similar to other times that this facility has been put out to bid for its management, we only received 1 bid, and that bid came from Global Spectrum, which is a large corporation having facilities across the country. They opted to stick with the management agreement concept. We had raised the possibility that someone could lease the facility or someone could come in as a manager of the facility. Global Spectrum chose to come in as a manager. Our interest in moving forward with this agreement and our negotiations with Global were really premised on 2 things. One was that we wanted, if at all possible, to do this at a lower cost to the city. As you know, we've been, the last several years, funding Mill City Management at about $320,000 per year. Prior to that, it was about $400,000 a year, and at one point in time, it was in excess of $600,000 per year paid to them to subsidize the operation. So like the deal that we struck with LeLacheur, our goal was to, with the spinners, our goal was to try to enter into some type of an agreement, some type of relationship that would come in at a lower cost than $320,000, thereby relieving the taxpayers of the city from that burden. Having said that, we also recognize very much, as evidenced, I think, by everything we do with our downtown area, we recognize the significance of the auditorium in terms of its economic development potential. So we wanted to put together an agreement that would make sure that the LMA, the Lowell Memorial Auditorium, would continue to have a high level of operation. It would continue to do a substantial number of bookings, and it would continue to be a place for civic meetings as it was intended when it was built back in the early 20th century. So we think we've achieved that with this agreement. We We have an agreement that we've negotiated with Global. They will be the manager. We do have it written into the contract that their work will be overseen by the city's contract administrator, which will be defined as the Board of Trustees. I will say that we were very, Global was very willing, and we were very demanding that the Board of Trustees play a very active role, a much more active role than they have been playing in terms of the management of the facility. By that I mean that there'd be a greater level of transparency and control by the city through the budgeting process, but also in terms of the rules and regulations that are promulgated by the Board of Trustees. They would oversee the management company in all regards. They would monitor the budget, monitor the capital expenditure recommendations. They'd deal with all the subcontracts and policies. Global, given their experience in operating facilities of this sort, would be paid $7,000 per month as a management fee. They would also be eligible for an incentive if they achieved our two primary objectives with respect to management and use of the auditorium. And use of the auditorium, as I said, is recognizes the importance of it as an economic development engine for the city. But we built in that they would be entitled to that incentive payment if they were able to run the facility at a profit, turning back our $84,000. They would then be eligible to get shares of any remaining money, but only if they could only get the maximum amount if they could book at least 125 dates at the facility during the year. If they had a smaller number, their share of the profits would go down. And we felt in this way that we were incentivizing them to, one, run profitable ventures at the auditorium and operate it as efficiently as possible, but also to do it in a way that made sure that the facility was actively used. The contract does not include food and beverage services. That will be done under a separate agreement, very similar to the way we've done food and beverage in other facilities in the past. We do require that they submit, as I said, all these regular financial reports and reports of bookings and so on. It has a number of provisions in the contract. I think those are the major ones that I would point to in terms of the overall operation. But I will say that in discussions with Global, we do anticipate that the budget that will be funded this year through the budgeting process of the city will come in below the $320,000 the first year, and then it should go down from there. It is our intention to operate the auditorium as an enterprise fund moving forward, and will be a separate vote will be sought from the council to do that, to set this up as an enterprise fund. That's sort of a summary of where we are with this. Again, I think it's a good contract for the city because I think it does guarantee that it's going to be an active facility. I think it's a good contract because it comes in at a lower cost, and I think it's a very good contract because it provides a high degree of oversight by the Board of Trustees and by the city administration.
A couple of questions. You've already answered one, which was who would the administrator be, because that was a question that we received. The other one is the amount of risk that the city takes on, and without having a copy of the old contract, it's hard for me. What I do know is that under the old contract, we were down, it had been higher, we were down to $320,000 a year in subsidy that we would provide. What other funding did the city provide as far as any capital improvements and maintenance in addition to the $320 on an annual basis?
Well, we did provide some services to the exterior maintenance. That would be done through our Parks Department and Public Works. We also provided the bond for the recent improvements to the facility. The facility fund that the city put in place back in the late 90s with the ticket surcharge had been adequate to fund that debt service for those bonds for the last 3 years. when we did the bond issue, the projections that were provided to us by the trustees at the time indicated that there would be adequate funds within that account to fund the debt service moving forward. Unfortunately, we were notified last summer, fall, and we've had discussions since that this year they may not be able to make that bond payment, so we will have to absorb that cost. But it's been the bond, and it's been the $320,000. There has been some money, particularly in the years when it was a larger subsidy, $400,000 or $600,000, that there was some profit that was turned back by Mill City Management to the facility fund. But any profit that got turned back in the food and beverage, I believe the way that it was operated, it would be offset by any deficits in operational expenses. So we didn't get the full amount of that share. But anyway, that got put into the capital fund as well, that was utilized for a variety of projects at the auditorium.
So if we stayed under the old contract, what was the bond payment for the coming year?
Tom, do you happen to know the bond payment for the?
Principal and interest that we would have been responsible?
About $250,000.
$250,000 per year. It would decline each year a little
Yeah,
bit.
decline slowly.
Right. So it's our goal, if we can run this, instead of that 320 going towards the operations, that if we can reduce that to zero or even make money, but any savings that we make off that 320 will help offset that bond that was issued, as well as any future bonds that, because there is a substantial amount of work that needs to take place at that facility.
So
And
going forward, it would be, sounds like $500,000 if we had a $320,000 subsidy, $250,000 for the bond payment.
Correct.
So in that ballpark.
Right.
Under the new contract, we're going to pay $84,000 a year as a maintenance fee. And then once they achieve profitability, we start to see that return to the city. Now, what other expenses is the city responsible for under the new contract?
Well, we will be responsible for basic costs. Let me start by saying we're entitled to all revenue that comes from the facility, but there will be costs that involved in operating the facility. We will be responsible for the staffing. We will be responsible for the utilities that are non-show related. The show-related costs will be offset by show revenue, but there will be those costs. But again, the other revenue that comes in from the food and beverage, or from the rental fees, or from any share of proceeds we get from ticket sales that are negotiated, those would go to offset those costs, and that's why we'd be able to knock that 320 down. We do right away know that there's about $150,000 in saving in personnel that will result from the staff being pared back because of economies of scale with the university facility that's also operated by Global.
In the first year of the contract, would we, I'm not understanding it, are we still responsible for that bond payment under the new contract as well?
Yes, we are.
All right, so that's $250,000.
That 250 we will be, right.
Either way, we got to do that.
Correct.
Well, at this point, I'll allow others. I don't know if members on the committee, Councilor Elliott, do you have any questions? Otherwise, Councilor Mercer has a question. Yeah, go ahead. Councilor Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm rather confused about this contract, and the reason I say that is because from what I'm looking at, doesn't seem like a better deal to me. Because let's go over this a little bit, and it's kind of tough to read all this and try to figure out what it means. But if you look on page 16, where it says Section 10, Operating Budget, paragraph B, when it talks about the operating expenses, and it says, shall be payable by the manager being the manager of the LMA, not the city manager, with funds from the facility operating account or otherwise provided by the city. without limitation, employees' payroll, benefits, reasonable location costs, severance costs, bonuses, related costs, general office supplies, advertising, marketing, group sales, cleaning expenses, data processing costs, and a fixed management fee. So let me see what we have here. This is what I'm understanding. We have here a subsidy that we paid Mill City Management on a line item in the budget for $320,000. And out of that $320,000 came $84,000, which was the management fee. So in essence, $236,000 was left in the subsidy because the management fee already came out of that money. It isn't that the city paid them separately. Now, Global Spectrum would make the city responsible for all the operating expenses. So I'm understanding in my research that the operating expenses would amount to between $1.2 and $1.3 million for the operating costs. So how do we actually save any money on that? I don't see a savings right now. So, I mean, I can't, Mr. Manager, you can answer that?
Sure, but I didn't want to interrupt you, Counselor.
Well, to operate the Lowell Memorial Auditorium was only 25% of the operational costs with that $320,000. Now, you're saying we're getting a better deal because we're eliminating that subsidy and we're paying them $84,000, $7,000 a month, and we're responsible for all the employees, their benefits. So having said that, how do you answer that, Mr. Manager?
Well, I would answer that there are some, and I've seen those numbers as well. That's the total cost of operation that would come with the come with the facility. But that also includes show-related activity costs as well. So if there are shows taking place, if there are events taking place, there's also revenue coming in, and those revenues. You know, Mill City Management is a good company that's done quite well there. The difference is going to be that the profit that Mill City Management made will now come to the city. And the costs that you've described, those $1.2 million, are offset by the revenues that come in from all of those events that take place there.
Well, my next question is, how long has Global Spectrum manage the arena? How long do we know?
I think since we sold the arena.
Which was how long ago?
That was back about 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah.
So 3 years ago, and you said that if Global Spectrum takes over the LMA, we won't see a profit right away, probably in 2 years.
Well, I said the first year is, particularly the time it's taken to go through this process, has set them back somewhat. But no, we probably won't be break even next year, but we won't be $320,000 either.
No, we'll probably be more than $200,000 like they are at the Songus Arena.
Well, if I could point out, one, that's a business decision that the university has made as to how they're going to operate the arena, because they have the university utilizing it on a regular basis for their hockey program as well as other student activities. So they absorb that within their operations. And as I said, that's a business decision. But let's also remember that when the city was operating the Songus Arena, the city's subsidy of that was somewhere in the vicinity of $600,000 or $700,000 a year, just in operations, not including debt service. And if Global has knocked that down to $200,000, then if we use the same type of ratio, that $320,000 could easily be down to about $80,000. But again, they've indicated that based upon their experience with similar venues, that they believe that can be turning a profit for the city.
I know that we're not talking about the concession part of this. That's going to be bid out separately. But these are the three things that I'm looking for in the overall contract between the Lowell Memorial Auditorium management and the concession. I would like all groups that go in there, whether it be CTI, nonprofits, or whomever, that they get to choose who their own caterers are. That's number one in my books. And secondly, they should have a flexible rental rate for nonprofits. And they should offer a discount to Lowell venues. Honest to God, they really should. What do our Lowellians get for any of this? I think they should get something. When we have Lowell High School or Middlesex Community College, these are ours. They're our own. I think they should be given some sort of a break, a discount, because they're ours. Having said that, yes.
If I
all
could,
right.
Counselor, the first one, the caterers, is actually within this contract that people will be able to use caterers. Now, it will be a level playing field. Caterers won't be able to utilize the facility for profit without some type of payment to the taxpayers. It'll be a level playing field similar to the concessionaire that is selected. In terms of the nonprofits, that's already provided for in the rules and regulations that will be that hopefully will be promulgated by the Board of Trustees in short order. Unfortunately, at this point in time, there aren't any rules and regulations that the trustees have promulgated. But we have a whole new group of trustees that I know are anxious to get going on that.
Well, I know that Mill City Management deposited 60% of its annual profits into an improvement account. I know you're talking about an enterprise account, but last year the account earned $70,000 from ticket surcharges, and Mill City Management gave $30,000 on top of that as well. So they paid.
Actually, Counselor, I believe the financials that I'm looking at here indicate that last year there was nothing provided to the city for a profit split.
Well, see, I don't know all this, but I know that Bill Topia is here, and I know that I would like to, I know that you said that this board unanimously supported it. I would like to hear from the board members, you know, what, if they, you know, they supported this. We would be paying the bond. Who's paying the bond off?
The city's always paid the bond off. We've had the ticket surcharge, the last 3 years, we've had the ticket surcharge money in place to pay for the bond, the debt service. That was what was promised to me back when we issued the bond, that there would be funds adequate to do that. Unfortunately, for the next bond payment, that fund has been drained and exhausted.
$2.6 million worth of work has already been done at that.
Paid for by the city, with the first 3 years of debt service paid by the facilities fee that the city put in place back in the late 1990s.
So you're telling me that all the revenues from the auditorium with Global Spectrum, all the revenues are going to come to the city?
They'll go into the account, and then if there's, after the $84,000 is paid off to us, the $84,000 that we pay for the management fee, then there would be a split of the profit on an annual basis.
And what are you saying, how many events are they going to have, did they say that they assume they would have at the auditorium? Did you say something like 120?
Yeah, 125. What we've put into the contract is they're only entitled to the 50% profit split if they have 125 events.
Last year, I believe Mill City Management had 150 events.
Actually, I think it's a lower amount. I think it was 114. In 2011-12, there was 114. In 2010 and 11, there was 128.
Well, that's the figures that I had when I inquired. But I would like to hear from anybody on the board, especially
Chairman O'Donnell is here.
And Bill Topia is here as well, and I just like, he's been here the longest on the board, and
Right.
I wonder if he has any input as to, is this a good plan for the city? That's all I want to know. I want to vote for something that'll be good for the city, and I'm not looking to rush into something either.
Right. Well, I think we do need to make a decision on this, because every day that goes by is less opportunities for Global to book, or if the council rejects this contract, for us to go back out to bid. But I know that Mr. Topier did send an email out today to everyone with a number of issues. But I will say that Mr. Topier was also the one that made the motion to approve this from the Board of Trustees. So I myself am a little confused.
Did he make
Because either-
17 corrections in this?
Because either his, he's either being duplicitous or derelict in his duties if he supported this back when it was voted, and now he's raising all these issues of why it shouldn't be approved.
Well, I'd be willing to let him sit in my seat if he wants to come up here and tell us if this is a good deal for the taxpayer in the city of Lowell.
I want to apologize for being
Mr.
derelict
Topia.
in my duties. That's been my practice for this
Want to
50,
sit in this seat?
no, for the 52 years I've been in government. However, I voted for this for two reasons. Number one, we have three fairly new trustees. And if Bill Topia voted against this, while those three other men were voting for it, it would have been a controversy. Secondly, and more importantly, our meetings with the manager were held in executive session. So I have not been able to make any comments on this matter until it became before you. I don't have anything against Global. My only concern is, I only have several concerns with it, and I spelled them out to you. One is, under the contract we had with MCM, and prior to MCM it was called Providence, it's Public Facility Management for Providence, we were only responsible for $320,000. The $620,000 was being paid when the city wasn't running it as they are now. It went down to, I think, 420, and then a few years back went to 320. My concerns are only this. Mr. Russo, who's used to work in Lowell, very, very talented man, was asked by, I think the woman's name is Susan Halter. I think she works for Adam. And she asked him whether they would produce shows. And I told Susan she wasn't asking the right question. Would they produce shows at their risk? And Mr. Russo said at that time, Global would not produce shows at their risk. They don't do that. Now, I spent my last couple of weeks on Googling. Global has a company called Global Presents, which in other cities produces shows. MCM produced 75% of the major shows in that auditorium. So I think what we should do is make sure that Global is committed to producing some shows. There are many venues in Massachusetts, and we're only 30 miles from Boston. The shows coming there have to have incentive. I worry about whether we're going to be able to generate the income by producing shows, because the manager spoke correctly. When we produce a show, presently we charge $1,500 for a local nonprofit, $2,000 for other nonprofit, and $3,000 for a for-profit. However, we do charge for all the expenses that those people have the auditorium spend on their event that day. And that's where most of that money comes from. If you look at the budget, you'll see that there's shows and the cost of shows. That's our people who are the ushers, the police, and stuff like that. So I have no problem with Global. My major problem from day one was under the original contract, we took a major risk, $320,000. If for some reason we lost money, that money and that responsibility was the responsibility of the vendor. Our exposure was only at any time the $320,000. Now, we had $2,881,000 that the auditorium generated for its capital account. A lot of that was the profit. I think I gave you a worksheet that's $1,000,000-something of the profit from MCM and the $2 facility fee. That paid for $2,881,000, I think the figure was, or maybe it was something less than that. We have $123,000 left. We've already made a payment this year on the bond issue. The city of Lowell has not made any bond issue payments to date. And I think the way it's going presently, they will not have to make them this year. If the economy picks up, if shows come in, and we're able to generate money, the concessions are very important. Concessions used to average $100,000, $120,000, $130,000 a year. I think they're down to about $90,000 now. But there's nothing wrong with Global. Global's a very talented company. Global's interest is not the interest of the city of Lowell. And our interest is not Global's. And I just feel as though we should tighten up the contract. I have no problem with the committee and the city manager picking Global. I do have a problem. I think it's a violation of Section 1 of Section 8 of Chapter 148, but that's a dead issue. I think that, by the way, I want everybody to read Section 8. I get an opportunity. I have no problem with Global. I have no problem with this going forward. I just want to make sure that we examine every part. That's a very complex contract. I don't read as well as you do, Mr. Chairman, so I only have to read it 10 or 12 times to understand it fully. But that's, I think that we should go forward. I think there's been misstatements made about this thing from day one, and I'm trying to keep to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Topia. Councilor
So
Mercer.
what I heard from a person much more knowledgeable than myself that has been there since day one, before I ever was, that knows it more than anybody here, that recommends that it's a good company, but the contract needs to be tightened up some. I would agree with that, and I would move to send it back to the manager to tighten it up with some understanding from people that have been there. I think when you have 3 people on the board that are newly appointed, I mean, they're great people, but they don't know this contract like people that have been there in the past. So to say that I can support something that needs more work, I'm not going to rush it. I really believe that there's some flaws in here, and as it stands right now, I can't support it. So that's my
Just
position.
point of order. You can certainly make that motion at the full council meeting, but in the finance subcommittee, it'll have to come
Well,
from one of the 3.
I'm
And,
making it verbally
and,
to
I mean,
you
you
as
can
to
keep it
whether-
open. I mean,
Okay.
it's your option what you do.
Well,
at
I'm
the
not
full
telling
council
you
meeting.
what to do, Joe. You
Okay.
can do what you want.
I'm just moving on to Council Laurie. You had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the back page, Article 17, I believe, actually, it's number 17. It's presently
Council Laurie,
anticipated,
you're referring to the contract
the
itself?
contract, Frank.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
There's going to be an enterprise fund established. Who's going to control that fund? We have the city, the board of directors, and the company. What's going to be the,
Well, it's a tough question to take a shot at that. It's essentially going to be, everyone's going to be involved with it. The final decisions, though, are going to be made, the final budget decisions are always the responsibility of the city council. The administration of the budget will be the responsibility of the Board of Trustees and the city administration.
good,
But it's, the Global will provide a budget. It has to be approved by the Board of Trustees, has to be sent on to me, or the manager, for approval, to be submitted then as part of the annual budget process to the city council.
that's fine, as long as.
I mean, if I may,
As long as
Counselor,
it's our board
Right.
and our council making a decision.
Right.
And not the individual company. And I don't have the part of the contract in front of me. Outside vendors, it says it may be used.
correct.
They're going to be allowed into the, is there going to be a cost?
There will be a cost, similar to, it'll be a level playing field, so that if we're taking a share of a concessionaire's revenue, there'll be similar type of share that goes to the taxpayers from vendors that provide services there that are making a profit.
Now, that concerns me somewhat. My understanding, Mill City never charged a fee, which allowed the vendors to come in. It made it very competitive. What I'm afraid of is if the fee's too high, if the caterers come in and they can't compete with the ICC or other outside restaurants, it puts the auditorium at a risk. Now, we spend literally millions of dollars in the city and the state to establish areas and put things like arenas and things like that into areas to rejuvenate the economy. So my question is, if we're going to do that, could we look at it within 6 months or the year of the first year to either lower that fee or eliminate it so the caterers could have equal footing with outside?
We could certainly review that at various points in time. I would point out that, again, it's sharing of profits. So they would be making profits from their use of the auditorium. The city would only be entitled to a share of those profits.
I understand that. My question is there's a balance. If that fee's too high and they don't rent the auditorium, now we're not renting the auditorium, they're going elsewhere. I would rather rent the auditorium.
Oh, absolutely.
And get the money. And that's why on something like that, I would ask that we look at it within 6 months to a year.
That's something, if we're talking about the rental of the auditorium, yes,
Right.
that's something that can be worked through. And
I would rather
the
get the
contract does
rental.
provide for that.
I would rather get the rental than the fee.
Absolutely.
To be honest with you. And I think the caterers would also, in the city, be better off. As I said, we spend a lot of money to establish areas. There was a couple of other questions I might hold for the city council meeting tonight, but those are the two main ones. Oh, the function of the board, is that going to change at all?
Yes, it is. It is going to change. It's going to be ramped up. It's my understanding that the board has been meeting on basically a quarterly and as-needed basis. The responsibilities in this contract for the Board of Trustees are greatly enhanced. Regular monthly reporting, regular by the Global to the Board of Trustees, approval of the budget, the necessity of approving rules and regulations, prior consent for certain bookings that previously did not occur, weren't the responsibility, really, of the trustees. So there's a great deal more involvement by the Board of Trustees in this contract than the prior contract.
Will they have more control over the vendor than they do now, over Mill City? Will they have more control over Globe?
Yes.
Okay, they will.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. There was one other question. I don't think anyone from Globe is here tonight. It concerns me that they have the arena in the auditorium. Quite frankly, I'm sick of every time I pick up the newspaper or I see the news, when you talk about Lowell, you're talking about UMass Lowell. At the arena, for example, I'll use debates. They get all the debates. I would like to see or like to know that they're going to compete with the city as hard as they are with the UMass Lowell. I would rather see those debates in our venue. It doesn't hold 6,000 people, but it has a charm that building doesn't have. So that would be one thing I have an issue with.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple of points. I think, Councilor, one, we've built into the contract, the incentive is based on the number of events that they have. So they're going to want to try to get up to that number of events. So they'll be trying to move as many events over there as possible. Another point is the university, quite a bit of time is already taken up by the university for shows and events with their hockey program. And with the move to Division I, there's going to be even more pressure put on that building for the arena to operate on behalf of the university, and less perhaps for bookings from Global. So I think all of those things work in our favor. And obviously the trustees have the oversight role in terms of the budget and looking at the sharing of personnel, so I think we've addressed that. I would note that the special legislation for the arena that this council put, the City Council of Lowell put forward, actually has a provision that for the manager of the auditorium to also be the manager of the arena. Because at the time, the intention, I believe, was for the potential for Mill City Management to be the manager of the arena.
Right.
So what's happened, of course, is sort of the opposite of that, is the Songus has fallen into Global, and now they would be, so it is allowed under the special legislation and was, in fact, envisioned by the City Council back in the 1990s.
One final question, I'll probably hold the rest for tonight. There is talk about sharing costs between the arena, and what safeguards are we going to have that they're not throwing arena cost on the auditorium books?
There really isn't an incentive for them to do that, given that, you know, their share of the profits, they would lose that share of the profits from the auditorium if they were to do that. But also, given the oversight role of the trustees in the city administration, that would be something that we would be monitoring.
Okay, great. That was really a concern I have. Whenever I see a partnership like that, which involves money, the antennas go up. That's the only question. Oh, one other question, but it's for the law department, the Madam Solicitor. The contract itself, did you ever review this at all?
Yes.
Any safeguards, as far as you're concerned? Now, I'm not an attorney, and I know nothing about contract law. How do you feel about it as far as, I know the city's going to take a risk, booking its own, allowing the acts to go this way. We are going to be running the risk. But as far as contractually, is the city safeguarded here?
Sure, we have, apart from the schematics of the contract itself, there are all of the typical safeguards that we require in any such contract in terms of indemnification and proper insurance and things of that nature, if that's the area of your question.
Right, that's about where I'm going, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Kennedy?
Was Mr. Lace, please?
No, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there anybody here from Global?
No,
Were they invited, or did they just,
we didn't invite them.
nobody invited them? You know, I just have probably 3 or 4 questions.
Councilor Kennedy, do you have your mic on?
It's on.
It is? Okay. Sorry to interrupt.
I just have 3 or 4 questions, but let me just start with, I think it's important to remember that the administration had this contract and negotiated this contract and tuned this contract and evaluated this contract for several months, and that several members of the city council asked for the contract beforehand. And so it shouldn't be that now, all of a sudden, you know, this has to be done as soon as possible. I think this city council has a responsibility to do due diligence on this contract and take a close look at it. It is it's a 5-year contract with a 3-year extension, and the auditorium is an important facility for the city. That said, in section 2 of the contract on page 4, it speaks several times about an operations manual and says that the operations manual will be developed by the city and the city manager. The operations manual shall be subject to the approval of the city. And the operations manual will become part of the contract when it's approved.
Correct.
Where is the operations manual? I called earlier today for a copy of the operations manual, and I was told that it had certain information in it, and so it couldn't be provided to me. My question is, at the beginning of the contract, if it says that the city is the city council and the city manager and the board of trustees, how can we approve the operations manual if we can't see it?
Well, the operations manual of Global is proprietary, so it's not available to us until we have an agreement in place. It's been approved by the council, and obviously it's been negotiated by the administration, has the approval of the Board of Trustees. Once that's done, then the Board of Trustees and the administration will sit down with Global and hammer out the specifics of the operations manual for the auditorium. They have a standard operating manual that they use, but obviously running the auditorium is different than running another facility somewhere else. And so that will be worked out, and then it will be incorporated as part of the contract as indicated. So that will be done at that time.
What I was told earlier today was that the operations manual already existed, and that people within your administration have already seen sections of the operations manual.
We've
So-
seen sections,
Okay.
not the whole thing.
How can you negotiate the contract and have the contract speak about the operations manual and nobody knows what's in it?
Well, obviously, the operations manual will require the consent of the city. We will do that when we finalize this. That's sort of the next step, that along with the budget, as well as some other decisions that will need to be made. But you know, it has to be, it's not going to be handed over to us until such time as we have a real agreement.
Well, did you bring it up when you were negotiating the contract? And they told you that you couldn't have it? Why is it in the contract?
It's in the contract because we want this incorporated, once approved, we want it incorporated as part of the contract. It won't be an attachment to the contract, but it will be incorporated as part of our agreement.
How can you know that if you haven't seen the manual?
Because the safeguards are built into the rest of the contract to protect the city's interests in terms of their performance. And it's also subject to certain rules and regulations of the Auditorium Board of Trustees and...
Right, but excuse me, but the contract says that when it's approved by the city, and I'm assuming that means by the Board of Trustees and by the City Council and by the
It
administration.
will not be approved by the City Council. That's not part of the... It will be approved by the Board of Trustees, and there'll be participation by the city administration.
The way that I read the contract, and if you look at the definitions at the beginning, when it says city, it says City Council and City Manager and Board of Trustees.
I'll ask the city solicitor to weigh in.
Sure. There are aspects of this contract that obviously will involve the city, meaning the city council, as well as the other entities. With respect to the operations manual, one of the things that's unique about operations manuals, whether it's going to be Global's or any other contract manual like that, is not only are they proprietary, for a very good reason in terms of competition and their own survival and their own techniques, but the other element to these is that they really are living documents. And not only would their standard operation manual be adjusted to meet the needs of the auditorium, but even once that manual is in place, companies that have such things, I'm not sure, I've never seen it, for example, an operations manual that we've had in the past with Mill City Management. You don't necessarily need to have one. I think it's beneficial to have one because then all the parties know what some of the further detailed day-to-day operation expectations might be. But that's a document that's going to be changing, presumably, during the course of the contract period, and that's not at all unusual. I'm sure in the case of Global, were they here, what they would tell you is just that for other facilities that they manage, that it is standard operating procedure with these operation manuals, that they will have them, the parties will agree to them, but they may find that they need to make changes to them, which is unlike your contract documents, which are intended to be permanent unless you actually have a signed amendment to that contract. So in terms of the functionality of it, it would not be anticipated coming to the council and become a public record. It's not something that would be negotiated with the council, but the safeguard is there that it would be negotiated and approved by the city, meaning the Board of Trustees and the city administration.
The last sentence says, upon its approval by the city, the operations manual and its amendments thereto shall be deemed to be a part of this agreement and
Right.
be incorporated herein by reference. There must be portions of the operations manual, I would imagine, that are not proprietary, that there's no reason why they couldn't be. And I would think that those are probably the sections of the operations manual that the city council would be most interested in.
Well, it's a good point to raise. What we've had in terms of discussions is likely table of contents section that may end up being attached to this, but the substantive matters would not be attached to the contract physically. However, the city is in a position, and I think this is very favorable language for the city. The city, because of this language, is in a position that if there was deviation from the operation manual, or if there was deviation, obviously, from the agreement of the contract in terms of the scope of services to be provided, that's something that would then constitute a breach of our agreement, a breach of our contract. So, I mean, the points that you raise are good ones. As a matter of practicality, in terms of how these are carried out, that's really, we don't have much leeway in terms of how we go about this. And I think that this sort of language protects us as in a very sufficient manner with
Okay.
respect to the operations manual.
Did you write the contract, or was the contract generated out of our law office?
No, the contract actually was a contract, first of all, that's similar to what Global is utilizing at the university, and then we took that contract and our sort of administrative team, law department, DPD, the manager's office, CFO, we've all collectively worked on this to make it one that works for the city. And then as we went through the process, even before we had a final document, the drafts were transmitted to the Board of Trustees at the auditorium so that they could begin looking at it and have enough time to review it. And we had a couple of meetings with them. And during that time, questions were raised by the trustees, written questions, and then we were in a position that when we would meet with them again, we were able to go through and address and answer those types of questions, which I think ultimately then resulted in the vote.
Okay. Could you tell me who is going to actually book the shows, and how does that, there's nobody here from Global, but does anybody know what the mechanics of that are? I think Mr. Topia, when he was speaking, talked about Global Presents or something like that. So will Global book the shows, or who's booking the shows?
Well, Global will book the facility. They do have Global Presents, which is an arm of the company that does shows, promotes shows. But anything of that sort that is done would have to be in agreement with the city and Global Presents in terms of any shows that are promoted in that manner. Otherwise, they deal regularly with promoters who operate shows, concerts, tours, whatever the case may be, around their other facilities that would then be used as a means to book or schedule the auditorium here.
Okay.
So it's going to be a combination of both, much as it is now, except Mill City is very active in booking their own shows, promoting their own shows on their own, without necessarily any input from the city.
Okay. Let's just go back for a second to, it's going to be a combination of both. What do you mean by that?
There are promoters out there that the Global is working with. They might work with specifically here. They might work with them on a number of their other venues that they manage that say has a particular performer. For the sake of argument, we'll say Bob Dylan, they're going to say, they're going to be approached by that promoter that says, I want to book Dylan at a number of your venues. What do you have available? And they'll say, we have Nashville, we have Lowell, we have, someplace in Virginia. And they'll say, well, what date is available in Lowell? And they'll work out a date. There may be a case where Global Presents comes to us and says, we have the possibility of bringing in the Rolling Stones, and we'd like to do that. It's going to cost this much up front, but we think that the ticket sales would generate X amount of revenue, the concessions would generate this amount of revenue. We think it would be a win for the city financially, or a win for the facility in terms of recognition. And that's a decision that the Board of Trustees would have to contemplate and make a decision.
Okay. So if the city, excellent examples, by the way, Mr. Manager.
Thank you.
If we used Global Presents, then there probably would be extra fees.
There wouldn't be, when you say extra fees,
There'd be, well, we don't have a contract with Global Presents, so if Global Presents put in a show, how would that work?
There's actually, I think, 3 different ways that a concert or a touring event of some sort could be at the venue. One would be that it's promoted by a third party, as in the manager's Bob Dylan example. Someone's representing Bob Dylan and bringing Bob Dylan to a number of locations and promoting his shows. They would basically pay a rental fee as well as pay for the costs of that show being in the auditorium. And the fee would be revenue, and the costs would be offset by revenues equal to, or costs and revenues would be equal in that regard. The second way is Global Presents, which would be Global, that's the arm of Global that does concert promotion or event promotion themselves. There's nothing in this contract that prohibits Global from choosing to do that. And if they choose to do that, that is essentially them deciding to promote a concert at their risk entirely, and they can use our venue to do it. And the venue, the benefit that the venue would see would be about the same as what it sees from the Bob Dylan example.
Okay.
The third option, which this contract also allows for but does not require, is that in the event that we are interested, and by we I mean the city, the Board of Trustees, under Global's recommendation and advice, feels that it makes sense for the venue to promote an event or a concert, which is what Mill City Management essentially has been doing to a large degree. The option exists. It requires the approval of the Board of Trustees every time. And they may always say, we just don't want to do that. But they can. And the reason why we want to keep that as at least an option for us is that while the other two generate a sort of fixed amount of revenue for the venue, it's not a very large revenue. The place where significant profits have historically been made by Mill City Management has been in the promotion of events. And so the opportunity to potentially see that level of potential benefit, potential upside, is why we want to at least leave that door open. We may collectively decide, or the Board of Trustees may specifically decide, we don't want to do that, and that's their prerogative under this agreement, but we at least wanted to leave the door open to that possibility as well.
Okay.
Council
I mean,
Kennedy, we're running up against the clock. If I could go to Council Elliott's questions now, or do you have something really brief?
Well, it's not necessarily, it depends on the answer, I guess, is where it's brief, but I just have 2 more questions. But I'll wait till after, see if there's time left after.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
I don't
Councilor Elliott.
think there's any time left. I'm sure this conversation will carry on the subcommittee reports, but I feel that a number of issues have been raised that were clearly of my concern as well, Mr. Manager. But personally, I feel there is far too much exposure to the city that the city has with this contract. Because I want to get back to the cost too, and I have pages of questions. Because the city inherits all the risk. We have, and that's where, in my opinion, that's where the rubber meets the road. It's the cost. It's what does it cost to run the building. And there's no incentive in this contract for Global to cut costs, because the city has to pay it all, and it's made very clear. I have some concerns with the revenue. I have concerns with the booking procedure, and I think there's plenty of room for renegotiation in this contract. And particularly with Global. You know, Global is going to come in, their management company going to say, okay, here, give us X amount of dollars. This is our manual. We're going to run the facility. But they don't have any risk. They don't expose themselves at all whatsoever. It's the city. So, you know, in the past, we would give Mill City a stipend or a fee. And of the $320, the $84 came out of that, correct? Their incentive fee. So they also had a ticket surcharge, because the total operation of the building is around 1.2, correct?
That's including all the costs, including the shows, the
Right.
costs that go with the show.
Right. So if there is a loss on the show, they take it. if there is if they also inherit all the risk of advertising and marketing, maintenance, operation, everything. We give them a subsidy, but if they don't bring in X amount of shows, they're not going to make the revenue, and they eat it. That's the type of deal I think we need to bring to the city council, where Global is going to come in, we'll give you an incentive fee, you pay all the costs, you keep the costs under control. City's even responsible for all the energy. I mean, I just foresee, I believe there are plenty of opportunities to go back to the table and to negotiate with Global if they want to do it. Yes, I understand you're saying that they're going to share their costs, the economies of scale with the university, but that's to their benefit. It's really not to the city's benefit. And let me explain why. If they don't bring in X amount of shows, we're still going to absorb some of those costs. So, you know, I believe it should go back to you. I think maybe it's a good first crack, but, and again, you know, capital improvement, this doesn't address any capital improvement. We know it needs work. When work had to be done at the auditorium, Mill City paid for it. They put in new
Council, they did
They
pay
put
for
in
that.
new, Mr. Manager, can I finish a minute? I've been sitting here listening for an hour. You know, they put in new carpeting, but after the expenses, they paid all of the expenses. Yes, we gave them a fee, but anything else above and beyond, they paid. Yes, there was a roof, there's a loan order on the roof, there was matching funds, there was grant funds for that roof, and we're still paying that loan order. They paid $802,000 on that loan order. So, I guess we are running over, and there's many more things I want to say, but I think the city's position, especially as it relates to cost, and putting out funds for shows, which you bring in shows, that's concessions, you know, pouring rights. I see that they're responsible. They get all the pouring rights revenue from, you know, selling beer and wine and stuff. So I would like to see the city represented more. I'd like to see the city get less exposure, less risk, and let this company take it on, because that's the only reason why, that's the only incentive they're going to have to bring in shows and cut costs if it's to their benefit, which is why they're a business. So I have more to say, but I know we're way over.
I would just,
Council
going to move to adjourn the subcommittee meeting. I also have things to say, but obviously this is, everybody at the council's here at the meeting. I think we can air this discussion at the full meeting. So move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn by Councilor Martin, second by Councilor Elliott. All those in favor say aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you.